Jake Rademacher is not just a filmmaker, he's a brother. He invites us into the emotional trenches of military service.
And he is the director of a brand new documentary, Brothers After War.
This documentary, this is real.
They told me the truth was not making it back from Iraq. What they were experiencing on the front lines was not what you were seeing on the news. As a brother, that really pissed me off. One of the hardest parts of being a warrior is coming home.
An IED goes off. There's bullets going across the lens of my camera.
I'm not cherry picking sad stories. These were the people that I met in Iraq.
The gentleman said, people have forgotten what Memorial Day is for.
You don't shy away from trauma, but you also don't leave the audience in despair.
We owe it to them to make the best society for ourselves and for our kids.
If you've ever loved a soldier, worried through a deployment, or prayed for someone who never really made it back, this episode is for you.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.
Welcome back to We the People, where we celebrate faith, family, and freedom by lifting up stories that define the American spirit. Today's episode is one of those stories. Jake Rademacher is not just a filmmaker, he's a brother. And in his powerful documentaries, Brothers at War and the newly released Brothers After War, he invites us into the emotional trenches of military service, what it means to serve, what it means to come home, and what it means to hold a family together through it all. In this conversation, we talk about the sacrifice behind the service, the unseen battlefields veterans face long after their deployment ends, and why telling the truth, especially about pain and healing, is a patriotic act. If you've ever loved a soldier, worried through a deployment, or prayed for someone who never really made it back, this episode is for you. And if you haven't seen Brothers After War yet, it's heading to streaming soon, and trust me, it's required viewing for anyone who cares about our country and the families that keep it going. Let's dive in. Jake, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gates.
So we're going to talk about a lot today. I want you to sort of be additive in any way you want, but I'll try to guide the conversation. But you've made these movies, so you're more of an expert on them or I should say these documentaries, than anybody. So feel free to, take this any way you want. But I want to sort of talk about, I want to start talking about these threads that sort of run through both of the films. That's sort of duty and family. They call to serve for a longing for home. In Brothers After War, we see that coming home isn't always a resolution. We hear stories about veterans all the time that struggle coming back from war. There's books that have been written on this, but it can be a start to a new fight, not a battlefield fight, but a fight on the home front, a fight within themselves. Can you talk about what you've learned about the strength and the strain of military families, and particularly from your own experience?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times the dramatic and exciting and glorious part and also very tragic part of war is focused on. And then it sort of ends when they come home and give a hug to their wife. But the ancient Greeks used to say that that's when the real war started. And what was really incredibly illuminating for myself was how true that is as I went around the world and did a deep dive into my friends' lives. And they were very generous with their stories. And I think that's what I've been told. One of the main strengths of the film is, like somebody say, I never understood what people were talking about, but you did sort of a beautiful job of showing that in the film and cutting from them in the war zone to the warfighter they became. And the fact that I was there allowed me to maybe push a little deeper, even when they would avoid it themselves. You know, they went back there and they thought about it and talked about tough moments, but then they also were incredibly open and generous with the struggles they had when they were coming home. And in the film, the folks who are actually doing the best, I was glad they got vulnerable about the difficulty they had when they first came back, because it would be easy to think, oh, it was just easy for them. And it wasn't easy for them. You know, Ben talks about running up and down the ocean along California. He talks about going to the VFW and then leaving because he's told, don't come here and drink your sorrows away. Go do something. You know, Jen talks about having moderate depression. And I just think it's really important to highlight that. You know, and then some of the vets you see, they're still struggling. And my brothers are about to hit it. They can feel it. They're at the end and they can see it. And they're looking at the end in two very different ways. And I think that's maybe the strength of the film, is that deep dive into that new battle, which is taking the uniform off, coming home, and trying to reintegrate into a society that you may no longer understand because your perspective has changed, having been out on the edge of civilization and seen things that are really tough to see.
For me, one thing the films do well is give the civilian community a perspective of what these families go through. I've been involved in a number of efforts to help veterans that are exiting the military find meaningful and rewarding careers post-military, because we're well aware of the issues of PTSD and the wounds that these servicemen and women have. One thing that isn't focused on enough is they need jobs. They need careers. And what that brings is fulfillment. And fulfillment is sort of an emotional element to someone's life. And you hit on all these things in your film, these sort of emotional sacrifices that our servicemen and women and their families make when they deploy. So let's sort of just back up a little bit. Why don't you sort of tell the audience who you are, what these two kind of bridge the two films, the two documentaries together for us, what your role is, why is it called Brothers at War and Brothers After War? Tell us about sort of the coming of these films.
You know, in some ways, the film started when one of my brothers died. And it was a month before 9/11, and the four brothers that remained, and two sisters, but the four brothers that remained were literally putting them in the ground. And a month later, 9/11 happened. My brother Isaac was already in the service. He's a West Point grad through Ranger School. I knew he was going to war. And Joe had been wanting to go to war and be a soldier ever since he was a young boy. So they went off. Isaac went to Afghanistan as a platoon leader in the 82nd. They both went to war with the 82nd Airborne to Fallujah. Joe was there, became a sniper, did 120 missions as an 18-year-old. They came home and there was this incredible distance. You know, I'd gone through an experience which made me understand what a brother was worth and be even closer to them, only to go through a couple deployments and them coming home. And they told me the truth was not making it back from Iraq. That what they were experiencing on the front lines was not what you're seeing on the news. Some of it, but just that little bit, just that burning bus and the body count. And as a brother, that really pissed me off. Mm-hmm. And I knew at that moment I was doing it for them to tell their story, to get the truth back to the American public, because I knew I probably wasn't the only family member watching the news wanting to know what was going on. But with the benefit of time, as you look back, you see maybe there was something even deeper inside you, you know, motivating you to take action. And I think it was, you know, my youngest, you know, my brother Thad, he left a son behind. And I knew, even though he was only 3, I was going to have to tell him who his dad was one day. And Isaac, when he was heading off on this third deployment, you see this in the film, he's saying goodbye to his little 1-year-old daughter. And I thought, man, I got to try to tell his story, who he was, why he's doing this. And so I took it upon myself. I took all the resources I ever made as an actor. I started a production company. I got permission from the Department of Defense. I went back to my hometown of Illinois. I've never sold anything in my life. And I raised, you know, $300,000 in a month from 18 different people. And I went to Iraq and I joined Isaac on his third deployment. And because my motivation was a brother trying to tell the truth, and I was a director of a film and I had final cut, once I made it through those initial stages of earning the trust of the soldiers on the ground, it started catapulting me forward into new situations, to the point where by the time I got back a second time, I had snipers inviting me to come out with them. I had Marine advisors telling me about their missions so I could choose where I wanted to be. I had soldiers saying, come over here, this is really cool, or come on this mission. And, you know, the journey, I started it for my brothers, but I really finished it for all the men and women I met on the way. I was totally inspired by them as individuals. And then I felt really compelled to bring back a more holistic picture of what was happening on the front lines to the American people. Gary Sinise saw the film. He fell in love with it and became my executive producer, started telling me what to do. That's, you know, we made it official. And we took the film out to military towns. So I did my job, right? Bring the truth back. The film was released in 10 countries, played on Showtime. It was #1 best-selling documentary on DVD. It was in Walmarts. So it was in movie theaters, 30, 60 cities across America. So I did all those things, which is kind of extraordinary. But what happened that I didn't expect was military couples in Columbus, Georgia and Fayetteville, North Carolina came up to me and said, we just had our first conversation about his or her experience overseas. Widows told me that it helped them to see the reality of where their service member had served. And my own sister-in-law said it made her feel better about Joe being over there because she knew he wasn't just, you know, ducking and covering the whole time, that he was also having fun, that he was having these relationships that were almost as close as brotherhood themselves. And so I thought, man, that's really important. Can we take it a step further? I created a journal. I showed it to Gary Sinise. Next thing I know, I'm on 5 military base tour. We create this workshop. It's really well received. I get a phone call from the Oklahoma National Guard in 2012. We've lost 14 guys in Afghanistan. They had a suicide a week before I got there. Can you help us? We got to reintegrate 3,500 soldiers and 3,500 family members, and we got to do 1,000 a time over a weekend. And I was like, okay. So we expanded the workshop to address some of those issues, and it just took off from there. And we've done it for about 50,000 people now. I'm in a hotel room right now because we're doing one tonight for DAV. And in 2019, the Gary Sinise Foundation started to support all those workshops. And then they also supported me doing a follow-up film, and Gary Sinise, even before the foundation was on board, after working with all these veterans for all these years and helping them come home from war, help them reintegrate with their families, I became curious about the friends I'd made in Iraq. Some I'd stayed in contact with, but some I'd lost touch with a little bit. And it's funny, in thinking about this conversation we have today, a realization came to me. It's different when I call you on the phone, how you doing, versus when I come in as a documentarian and I spend 3 days with you. I'm embedding in your life, and they know and I know we're there to get to some deep truth. So we're going to ask questions, and because I'd already done that in a war zone, and I guess they felt done a good job of telling their story and been very fair about it. It allowed me to get, a much richer understanding of that experience. It allowed me to ask questions of people that I'd met in a war zone and created my own bond with, questions that all veterans were facing. And because they knew the film was going to be available in the American public, like you said, so that, citizens could get a better understanding of what they were going through, they also knew we were going to use the film for other veterans to start to unpack maybe some trauma that they were suppressing, maybe help a conversation with a military family member. And because of that, they were incredibly vulnerable and emotionally courageous, and kind of went there with me, And that was one of the extraordinary things as a filmmaker in making Brothers After Wars. I got to go even beyond my knowledge set in the course of making the film.
So you mentioned this idea, the circumstances of servicemen and women leaving for deployment. But what your film, Brothers After War, does is really demonstrate the struggles of them coming home, this reconnection. I mean, there's a scene in Brothers After War where we see veterans struggling to reconnect with their families, really their children, their old self. You're changed when you come back from war a lot of times. So as someone who's watched this happen up close, both as a filmmaker and as a brother, what advice would you give to families trying to support veterans they love? And what do we get wrong as a country when it comes to the idea of a quote, homecoming?
For family members specifically, I would say, listen, it's really good for them to unpack even something traumatic or scary. It's okay if they get emotional. It's okay if it gets a little messy. Allow them to get it off their chest. Allow them, because here's the reality of a veteran. If a veteran starts opening up about a really messed up experience overseas, something that they're holding back, if they trust you, the first thing they do is test you. So if they start telling you something and it kind of freaks you out and you don't want to listen to it, they're going to stop and almost feel like they should put that back in the box and not share that. They don't want to burden their family with it. And if you can't handle it, that's okay. You can kind of be clear about that and maybe have them talk to somebody that can. But if you are the kind of person who can handle it, can hear someone else's trauma and, just hold space for them, nothing could be better than unpacking it. And it's going to be messy and they're going to be emotional and it could be a kind of a creative, interesting night. But the reality is that they'll go to sleep and the next morning they will feel a little bit better. And the next day, maybe say, hey, do you want to maybe talk to somebody about some of that stuff? Maybe, a friend, another comrade, or even a professional to kind of walk through some of that. That's one of the things I would tell a family member. And I've kind of learned in my journey that something maybe they don't know, they go, the question, it gets all crazy. It's like, no, that's actually really good, but don't try to fix it in the moment. Just listen. It's okay to just hold space. Another thing for me personally, and you see this in the film, you see my brother Joe give me a hard time. And, I think that's what motivated me to make the film is I personally feel like being there and having a relationship with my brothers is worth it. And so I'll take some hits here and there to my pride or to, maybe I won't rebuttal like I would somebody else, just to kind of be there in a conversation with them, even if it's going a little rough, even if it's not great. What I've found is that sort of over time, they become a little bit more comfortable with you. And my brother Joe gives me the hardest time of anyone, and everybody gets to laugh at it. He was doing it when he was 19. He does it again in the new film. It's always funny to watch people laugh at that. I've been able to be there for him. He does talk to me. I am a resource for him. And then when he made his transition, he turned to me, and I got to help him and use all the knowledge I gained from the film there. So that'd be my advice for family members is to really allow a chaotic situation if necessary, but just know that that's sometimes part of the process. When we first open up something that we've been suppressing, it's emotionally chaotic, and sometimes there's anger, and then what's followed with anger is a softer emotion. The softer emotion's good. You're starting to heal from it, but then growth comes after that. So embrace that process. What do we get wrong as a society? Boy, that's a deep question. I think where we have lost our way, or maybe we never had a way, but where we can learn from others. The ancient Greeks created theater for service members, soldiers, to explain what going to war was like to the rest of society. The American Indians had all kinds of ceremonies to welcome the braves back into the tribe. They had the sweat thing in the tent, which was braves, which was veterans, kind of working with them, helping them kind of hallucinate about their experiences, get a little bit out of their body, talk to them, let them know that this was actually a process, that a physical process and a spiritual process to go through to come back to society. And then they had a ceremony where they'd laying on of hands, meaning whatever sins you committed, whatever you've come back with, it's absorbed into the tribe. You did that for us. And then they were allowed to touch the children again and play with them. And they were welcomed back into the tribe. Once they'd gone through this ceremony that the whole tribe was involved in. And I think we as a society, we support our troops, which is awesome. So much better than what we did with the Vietnam War. So huge progress, right? Huge progress with this particular group of veterans. I think what we want to do is we want to lean forward and do whatever we can. You said something very important. I want to give them jobs. And the thing you said why was meaning and purpose. If you volunteer to potentially lay down your life for others, you want to be of service. You want to have purpose. And sometimes when we come back and we have to take the uniform off, the identity's gone. We don't know what to do. There's no structure. There's no sergeant major. There's no commanding officer. There's no mission. There's no camaraderie. There's no brotherhood. If you think about all those things, what do? So if we reach out and try to help them find their new place and help them find meaning and mentor them, I think that's what we could do as a society to truly help our service members and our veterans come all the way home.
Along the lines of meaning and purpose, there's a great book called Tribe, and it goes through sort of, what it feels like to be a member of a tribe. It really does give you meaning and purpose. It's like playing for a sports team. You're collectively advancing a shared goal, but you're relying on others and they're relying on you. And there aren't many circumstances that can provide a veteran with the sense of tribe that they feel when they're deployed overseas, literally trying to save each other's lives. And a career can do that. A family can do that. I think that society needs to have, we are getting better, but I think we need to have better structures in place to be able to absorb and welcome veterans back into a sense of normalcy and community in society. And then on the listening point, something that's come up a lot on this show is vulnerability. And you mentioned the word vulnerability a couple answers ago. If you're not willing to listen to someone, then they're not going to be vulnerable with you. And when people can get vulnerable, you can build the bridge to truth. So I think your point on listening, it's so simple, but it's so important. Listening is just, we all want to talk. Not everybody wants to listen, and listening can be a lot more powerful than talking. So I appreciate your comments on those. Now, you didn't just set out to make a film. I mean, you set out to really tell the truth, and the truth is something that we like to highlight and emphasize on this show. Both of the documentaries sort of pull back the curtain on what military service actually looks like, especially in a time when fewer Americans sort of have a direct connection to someone in uniform. Was it your goal to sort of kind of bridge the military families to the civilian world? I mean, how do you hope Brothers After War helps close that gap? Or what do you hope that Brothers After War's legacy is? Because, and let me add to my question. I really see it serving two audiences. I see it serving the audience that is actually in the film. That you're actually helping veterans and their families sort of succeed at a life after war. But I mean, as a civilian, it certainly helps me to understand a clearer picture of what those families are going through, so I can also be supportive as well. So what was your goal with the film?
Without truth, you have nothing, right? Without truth, you have nothing. So with truth, you then can start to build something. And what truth gives you is understanding. How can you support someone if you don't understand them? How can you have empathy if you don't understand? But if you have truth, and then you have understanding that comes from that, and you have empathy that comes from that, you can feel their emotions. What is empathy? It's I'm feeling you. I actually feel your feelings. I feel like I understand where you're coming from. Well, then I'm operating from a whole nother place. You feel like I understand you. I do understand you better. And then you're going to let your guard down. You're going to talk. And then we can really do something incredible and beautiful. So the bridge idea is 100% true. That was what motivated from the very beginning. That's been my concept as a filmmaker. It's just to put a frame around the reality of who these people are and what's in their heart. And I think if you see what I've seen, you're just going to be blown away, and in your heart, you'll want to do what you can for them, and also see the valuable resource that they are. Veterans are mission focused. They care about the group. They generally show up early. And maybe there's something that they're still struggling with. Maybe there's an issue. Maybe there's something, but a lot of times there's a good fix for that. And I think if the rest of us can see that, we can do so much for them. I think the bridge comment is very accurate. If I could just put you in the first film, if I could put you in the foxhole with them, if I can take you out on those missions, if I can put you in a sniper hide site, if I can let you see the world as they see it, be there with them while they're doing the work. Wow. Let's let it go wherever it goes from there. In Brothers After War, it's revisiting some of those moments for new insights that time gives us and wisdom. But it's also, let me take you into their living rooms. And you said truth, which is really interesting as well, because the truth is they're not just this thing that I asked them that maybe they cry about. And that's where I think some films get it wrong. And there's a temptation just to do that. And I actually felt like that would be untruthful and unfair to them. So even from the very beginning and talking to Gary Sinise about my concept for the film, I was like, because he was asking about the budget. I'm like, Gary, I can't just spend half a day with him. I can't sit him down and just interview him about a sad stuff. I gotta go out with him. I mean, see in the movie, I'm jumping out of airplanes with them because they're skydivers, professional skydivers. I'm going to Honduras because they're on a mission to help another vet. I'm spend a whole day filming one of our veterans working with kids with special needs because I wanted to show her in that element that she may still be doing art to sort of work through some things, but she's also giving back to children and funny and collaborative and helping them, as she say, have a better life, working with them where they are and taking them to the next step. And I feel like that holistic and truthful picture of our veterans, I know they've appreciated it and told me they do, but I think our citizens appreciate it because it gives you an opportunity to see who they really are. And when they make you laugh and when they make you proud and you see how dedicated and focused and still giving to their community they are, I mean, that just makes you want to help them even more, right? And make you feel maybe a little more comfortable approaching them and talking to them. And so that was a goal. Maybe I didn't even know I was doing it, but I think I do know, the bridge thing is amazing, and I hope it is a bridge. I do know the truth was always a focus of mine. And like a real holistic, truthful picture of them, a truthful depiction of them was something I was really trying to achieve in Brothers After War.
Jake, you've had two very unique perspectives to deployments. You've been on the sidelines from the perspective of a brother, of a family member who's not there, but certainly very tightly connected to it, very closely connected to it. And then you've actually been in the war zone. You embedded yourself in the war zone at Brothers at War, and then in the lives of these veterans and Brothers After War. What is one assumption you had from the sidelines that you've changed your mind on once you've gone into the war zones and into the lives of these veterans? Or what surprised you the most?
what surprised me the most was Marines' kindness for one another. They'd get a bag of M&Ms and they'd share it with everybody else. I knew they were tough. I mean, my God, Ronald Reagan said it. We see it in movies all the time. Iwo Jima. We know the Marines are tough, right? They'll tell you they're tough. You can't meet a Marine. He won't tell you or try and demonstrate to you right away that he's tough. It's part of their ethos. But I didn't realize how kind they were, like how generous they were with one another. Another thing that really surprised me was how deep, say, some of the soldiers were. We're going out to the Syrian border. And, one of them's reading the Bible and the other one's reading Catch-22, and they're thinking about their life. And I remember looking out at that, bullet pocketed window, and I was thinking about my own life. And I'm watching camels go by. And so this depth, them thinking about what we're doing over there, them thinking about their lives and their experiences, like this is all part of who they are. And I don't think I really understood that as well before as I did after.
Well, my brother-in-law, who is a retired Marine deployed to Iraq, will very much appreciate you calling him kind and smart. He's never shared his M&Ms with me, but he's a pretty smart guy. I'll give him that. So he's going to be excited to hear about that. I want to touch on the emotional honesty of your work. I mean, when I watch Brothers After War, to me, that's what sets it apart. You don't shy away from trauma, but you also don't leave the audience in despair. So many documentaries, so many films either, go hard in the paint on joy or and hope, or they go hard in the paint on pain. But you got it all in there. You covered this from all different angles. How intentional was that balance?
It was very intentional. I felt like, the trust I had with them allowed us to go to some pretty deep places. So I was able to ask those questions. And having been with them in a war zone, for instance, the Marine gunner, 13 deployments, which you don't see in the film, was the first time I asked him about that moment. He's like, yeah, bullets were flying, blah, blah, blah. And I asked a follow-up question. I was like, Gunner, I was there. For me, it was grace on earth, you touching the face of that wounded Iraqi soldier. And I pushed in on it because I thought it was so profound. And he then looks down, breaks down, and starts to even cry a little bit and say, well, it hurts. That's that intimate connection you have with another man. And he was my soldier. And he'd never really gone there. He'd always brushed past it. And he talks about that in the film. And he called me a couple months after I was there and he's thanked me for coming. He said, thank you for coming. It helped. It really helped. The reality is if I just showed you that, I would have done him a huge disservice because he's also a husband who's devoted to his wife. His wife didn't want to be in the film. That's why she is not interviewed. But we said to her, you've got to be in this film. We can't have him people thinking he's living in this big house all by himself. Like, it's not fair. It's not good. Like, they're going to worry about him, so there's some beautiful shots of him walking out, looking at the pond, and you get a sense that he's really happy. He's happy. He's there with his wife. He has, his children, his son, and he's found a new sense of peace and what the future holds. Derek talks about losing his best friend, and people forgetting the real meaning of Memorial Day. Well, it was also important to go out the side of an airplane with him because he's also the flying Viking, and he's an adrenaline junkie. He loves that stuff. That's part of who he is too. So how do I just sit him down and talk about the sad stuff, but not also show you who he is? And isn't it more powerful to see him laughing, strapping me into a parachute, going out the side of a stinking plane with him, and all that exuberance and joy, and then go back to the loss of a friend because it's Memorial Day and we're reflecting back on that person, So I thought it was really important to be truthful to them, to give you a full picture of who they are, but also to give the audience, that holistic picture of the film. And it goes all the way back to the very beginning.
Yeah. When you watch a movie and a lot of times a documentary too, you're watching characters. They're almost performing. When I watch Brothers After War and Brothers at War, I'm watching humans. I mean, you do such a good job of displaying the human element and making it very relatable to a topic that is not very relatable to the average American. So kudos to that. Now, speaking of watching it, it's headed to streaming soon, Brothers After War. And a big theme of this show is takeaways. I like this show to be a place that people can come. They're not eavesdropping on a conversation. They're sort of participating in it. And when they leave our episode, they can take action items back into their daily life and apply something they learned from this show. So for those that haven't seen Brothers After War yet, who will be able to see it very soon streaming, why is now the moment to watch it and to share it with their family, especially their kids? I say that as a father of 3. What kind of conversations do you hope this film sparks at the dinner table?
Well, it's going to give appreciation for our veterans and what they did and why they did it. It's a great sort of historical lesson as well, because our very first Jason Grundy, we go all the way back to him parachuting in to Afghanistan, that experience and also what it cost him. So it's a fantastic way, say, for children to kind of show them who serves them and why they do it, and the price of that service. But I think the value goes beyond that. There are truths in that film. There are lessons learned the hard way that could serve you in anything you face in life. So I think watching Brothers After War, the conversation I hope they see is that they can see someone go to war and come back and make sense of maybe something they've experienced that was negative, and experience post-traumatic growth and find meaning in what's really important in life. You can take that and apply it immediately into your own family. So my hope is that the lessons or the takeaways are twofold. That, yeah, it's an incredible way to get a better understanding of our veterans. It's going to create a lot more connections between them. You're going to really enjoy this holistic look at that. It's a fun movie. It's funny at my expense. We tried to make sure that there was humor in there, and in the end, a lot of hope. But there's also, from a selfish perspective of viewer, there's some really, really good lessons in there that are woven into the fabric of that film about how these men and women have worked through something that was difficult and come out on the other side. And you can apply that to any experience in your life, any trauma you may have faced. It's something also that you can apply that understanding to someone else that's in your inner circle. So I think the film, will hopefully be very powerful for people from that perspective as well.
Yeah. And in both films, we see that, love of country doesn't just mean waving a flag. I mean, it's easy for us to all call ourselves patriots, but a true love of country, it often means loss. It often means perseverance, quiet acts of heroism, that most people will never see. Character is what you do when no one's watching. These men and women are fighting for our life. We read about it, we see pictures, but we're not there. What does patriotism mean to you today as a filmmaker, as a citizen, and as a brother?
There's so many ways to serve. Maybe I'll start backwards. As a brother, the film, spending time walking a mile in their new shoes with them, it made me understand this transition that all must go through to come out the other side. And it helped me be a better brother. So when my brothers took the uniform off, because in the film, one's a lieutenant colonel on his 7th and final deployment in Tunisia. The other one is a master sergeant. He's deployed 9 times. He's a former Tier 1 operator. But what was before them was that same difficult transition that friends of mine had gone through and that we explored in the film. And it allowed me to sit in Isaac's truck, driving out to their new mountaintop and saying, does it feel like the Army divorced you? Yes, that's exactly how it feels. It almost pricked the sore and allowed him to get it off his chest and work through it. Or my brother Joe, when he left the Army and had to find a job, and he had to find one in Raleigh-Durham because his wife's getting her degree in nursing at Duke. It was knowing that I to be available to him, to check in 3 times a week, to give him looking for a job coaching. And that what he was going through is not just looking for a job, but looking for a new way of life, looking for a new mindset about how to attack the problem. And the old one wasn't always going to serve him. So it was also providing him new context for how to do that. So that's how this whole project's allowed me to be a better brother. what was the first part of that question?
Just from a filmmaker, a citizen, what does it mean to love America?
I'll answer your question. So I think we've gotten a little far. I think we're starting to veer away from our patriotism. I think we're starting to veer away from a real acknowledgement and understanding of how we got here. I recently took my children to Mount Vernon. I took them to Monticello. Monticello, what an amazing place to take my children to try to contemplate America. What does it really mean?
Yeah.
And one thing I said to my kids, because they weren't totally understanding it, because they don't really cover our founding fathers anymore in school. They cover civil rights and Martin Luther King, and that's all really, really important. What it dawned on me in that moment was, Noel and Josie, before 1776, no one had freedom for anybody. You're under a king or a despot or a dictator. There's no freedom. There's no citizens. And so this was the start. And without this, we don't have all those other conversations. So I think patriotism is kind of restoring our pride in America a little bit. And by the same token, you do not need to hide. Thomas Jefferson, man, that guy was a little bit of a jerk. There's some things he did. There's no reason, there's no need to make excuses for it. You can literally just say, well, he only freed 10 slaves out of the 600 that he had. Not really cool. He also doubled the size of America. He was an incredible president. It's okay for two truths to be true at the same time. And actually, in going back to an earlier point you made, in truth, we can start to grow and build and evolve and change. So I think patriotism is to start to, get back to how great America is. One of the things I have to kind of explain to our Afghan vets, because they've been told it's complete failure and, everything was for nothing, because that sells a news story. That's an exciting tagline. But if my memory serves, when we invaded Afghanistan, it was because 19 people killed 3,000 citizens in about an hour. So that hasn't happened since. So as a lot of veterans have told me, better to play an away game than a home game. But there's more than that. There was a 9% literacy rate. 10 years later, it was 20%, and it was 30% after that. So we don't know the impact of letting little girls after third grade learn how to read and continue to study all the way to be college professors. And they may not be doing that now, but 20 years of education and insight and our value sharing with that culture, we don't know where that's going to go. But I'll tell you this, when ISIS was coming back into Iraq and it looked like it was going to be a dark night for many years, they said, could you please come back? And we did. And they fought their own fight with a little bit of help. And you go to Iraq now, and I work with veterans every year that come back from Iraq. They say, you wouldn't recognize the place, Jake. It's completely different than where you were. So patriotism doesn't have to be a blind loyalty, look at the flag, never examine any of our faults, but it's also not really appropriate, I think. And I would encourage those to also remember what is great about this country and why it is beautiful and what people have done to put us where we are. And though it's not perfect, that doesn't mean we have to just kind of throw it out and discard it. We can still have pride in what's good and work towards a better tomorrow. So I think, whatever contributions we can make, whether it's me as a filmmaker telling people's story, whether it's doing a workshop so 250 people can make better sense of their lives, whether it's giving a job to a veteran, whether it's spending a couple hours trying to better understand their story and seeing where you can make an impact, all of that is important. And it makes a contribution for us to continue this thing called America and make it even better tomorrow than it is today.
Patriotism for me is an appreciation for America, the good and the bad. You can love something and not think that it's perfect. And appreciation comes through a learning of history. And when we start taking history, or I should say opportunities to learn history away from our youth, you're stripping them of an opportunity to fall in love with this country and form their own opinions about it rather than give them your own opinions. And so we as an obligation, patriots that love America through documentaries, through platforms like this show, have an obligation, have a duty, to use a patriotic word, to communicate our love and appreciation of America from our vantage points to others, so we can communicate that story of how great this country is and that it can always be better. And we have an obligation to continue to fight to protect it and fight to make it better. So I appreciate the work that your film does there. I want to talk about faith. Many of the men and families and brothers after war are dealing with deep wounds. Some are visible, some are not so visible. Did you see faith playing a role in the healing process? And what role did your own faith or your search for meaning play in your journey through these stories?
Faith for me was incredibly important. I allude to it a little bit in the beginning of the film, as much as I can, and then we had to move on because it's not my story. I'm just the guide. But I had a 2-year international custody battle for my children. And in the first 7 months of that, all the resources I had, tenacity, perseverance, all the finance, I was able to get my daughter back from the Czech Republic. And so I as a 3-year-old, I had full custody of her. But there was no man-made thing on earth that was going to get Noelle to America. And I remember going to church every Sunday and my knees hitting the kneeler and just praying to bring my son home. And it happened. And, last year he got his first communion. And not only did he come home, but his mom came home too. And we're divorced, but the kids go back and forth and they have both their parents in their lives. And for me, when I reflect on that, that was something that there was no power that I could make that happen. That happened out of something. I couldn't make that happen. And it happened, it was, and when I finished that after 2 years, finished that insane, crazy, stupid use of 2 years of my life, but utterly necessary. In the course of it, there was this moment I was looking out at the ocean. I was like, okay, if you had to face this coming back from deployment, because I've been to war, I've been in combat and then been in Beverly Hills a week later. I've experienced that. We have to go through that and this at the same time. Now I know why we lose 22 guys a day. Like, this is crazy. This is too much. So I was like, if I ever get out of this, I'm going to do something for the vets to try to help them make sense of that. And I used everything I teach in these workshops in my own life, and it works. And immediately after, that was in 2018. We wrapped that up, signed the agreements in September. And by like 3 or 4 months later, I got the green light from the Gary Sinise Foundation to make this film. So I went to make this film on a journey. I have to say, it was a bit of a calling. I don't know why, but there was like, I wanted to return to the last time my life made sense. And I know that sounds sort of crazy or ironic, but there was something beautiful about being out there in Iraq with those men and women looking death in the face, literally risking your life sometimes, but also trying to do a deep dive into understanding something very complicated and documenting their lives going over, coming home, in the battles, reconnecting with their kids, reconnecting with their spouses. It felt very important. I felt very alive. And I felt like I drifted from that. So I took this project on to really reconnect to them, but also to myself. And I did. I found myself again in this, and in reconnecting with these men and women, it healed me. It really healed me. I learned a lot from them. Many of them also had gone through a divorce. And so in trying to tell their story and trying to understand their stories, I was also making sense of my own life. And that provided a lot of healing and a lot of hope. And I think, have I seen evidence of faith? Yes. I used to go to services overseas in Iraq. Chaplains are a huge part of the military. It's often the first stop for somebody if they want to make sense of something. If something's troubling them, they'll go to the chaplain. So faith has always been a part of our military's experience. Now, each veteran is different, and I let them have whatever they have and just try to tell their story wherever they are. But for myself, this entire project is really a calling. And the thing about callings is you don't always want to go on the journey. You're like, do we really got to do that? Really? Because there's other films I could probably make that would be a little easier and take a little less time. But in the end, I'm really glad I did. I'm really glad I did go on the calling. And every time before we do a seminar, and I've got one later tonight, we talk about this as our facilitators. It's like you almost drop down. You drop into a different place, and I don't know where that comes from, but I try to go a little deeper, and I'm just standing there listening to people talk, and they open up and they'll look at you and they'll be like, yep, give me some more. And then sometimes things come out of you, answers that you don't even know where they come from, and maybe that's the spirit, I'd like to think maybe it is. One thing Noelle once said to me, one of our trainers, is like, there's darkness in the world. And I know when we do this, we're bringing some light, and you feel like you're doing something really positive and you're helping people. And that makes me feel really good. And I'm a man and I make mistakes and I do things wrong. But I do try to return to something bigger than myself and try to, live with some principles and also pass that on to my kids.
Well, there's a lot of hope in that answer that you give, and that's where I want to sort of conclude the episode around hope. We do that a lot on this show. We sort of try to end on a hopeful anecdote. So, after spending years in war zones and seeing the trauma that these individuals experience over there and experience when they come home, what does give you hope about America or our veterans or the families that maybe we don't see behind the scenes?
In working with Gary Sinise, one thing that I had this great privilege to spend, I worked on this thing for 3 or 4 years, and then I probably spent another 9-10 months working with him as we recut the film, what to leave in, what to take out. We screened it for veterans, got responses. And one of the things that was very important to him was hope. He wanted he felt like in some ways these were archetypes, these are archetypes, and a little bit like Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan goes off hopeful, patriotic, following the family thing, gets hurt, has a lot of struggles. But then in the end, he's on his legs. He's married. He started business. There's a lot of hope. There's a journey there. And even in the final song, I'm moving on. I faced all my demons. Looking into the darkness it's not something to be, it's something to be afraid of, but it's really something to face. It's something good. It can actually provide you hope. If you understand the importance of community, you said faith, that by communicating about our experiences is a way to process them, to look for support from others. If you do all those things, if you have all those good practices, you're going to process those experiences and experience something called post-traumatic growth. And that's a deeper appreciation of life. That's a better understanding of what's really important. That's more empathy for others. That makes you a better man. That makes you a better husband. That makes you a better father. That makes you a better citizen of the United States. That's really important. That's what hope is based on. So I think the hope you see in Brothers After War comes from a very real, sincere, earned place. But these guys give me hope. These people who are willing to deploy up to 13 times for us, what does that say about our country? They wouldn't do that if they didn't care, if it wasn't worth something to defend and to die for even. That gives me a lot of hope. And I feel like we are in a very special place at a very special time, and we have to kind of reinvest and reinvigorate and focus on what we all can do to make the place just a little bit better that we were gifted to by our forefathers and foremothers.
Well, I am hopeful that my audience will go out and in turn become your audience and see both of the documentaries, Brothers at War, but now Brothers After War, since they can stream it by the time this episode goes live. So tell them where they can find Brothers After War and all your work.
You can find Brothers After War on Amazon, iTunes. Walmart has actually ordered 12,000 DVDs, so it's going to be on the shelves of Walmart. It's going to be just about any place you can stream a film. I know there's a lot of other streaming services that I'm not mentioning right now that they're eluding me a little bit in my mind, but all those places. And if you go to brothersafterwar.com, we'll have a place where you can click on the button and see all the places that you'll be able to watch it in your own living room. So yeah, and I hope you do. I think you'll like it. And Brothers at War is going to get re-released about mid-August. So look for that as well. And it's going to get re-released all over on all those platforms as well too.
Awesome. Well, we support you. We support our veterans, and we thank you for supporting our show by coming on. Thanks for joining us, Jake.
Thanks for having me, Gates.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. And they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Gates Garcia, so that's no excuse.